part of today. So Colleen, can we read? This community of practice is one of several that Bridge runs. It's the Maths and Science Learner Support one, funded by the Xenix Foundation, and it's been running since 2010. But I thought that it would be helpful to look a little bit at Bridge's theory of change and to go back and examine Bridge's methodology so that we can kind of consider that in relation to the M&E exercise that's been done. So, the theory of change that Bridge developed is that innovation is not necessarily about something new, but that it's actually relational. Bridge emerged post the DBSA roadmap process was done in 2008, where there was a recognition that there was a huge amount of working practice in South African education, and yet there was this sort of anomaly that the system was in dysfunction and not operating properly. And the question was asked, well, what's happening to work and practice? What's happening to the impact of evidence-based research? And so Bridge has tried to work with the theory of change that if you somehow link what works, you'll have an effect on the system. So the innovation, as I say, is not about something new, it's about creating relationships and scaling rather through relationships than by taking small things and making them big. And the way in which Bridge does this is through the unit of the community for effective practice. So, Colleen? Did Kelvin And so just to talk a little bit about what a community for effective practice does in terms of Bridge's terminology. First of all, I think the important thing to say is that a community for effective practice is inclusive. The idea is that it should include those most affected by the problem. So as much as is possible, we try and include learners, teachers, principals in our communities, as well as the other people who are involved. But also we try and be as multi-stakeholder as possible. So in meetings, have a range of people from government, from unions, from funders, from business, from civil society, from universities, from research departments, and so on, so that there can be a collective working together. Bridge's communities of practice focus in 4 specific areas. One is school leadership, one is teacher development and accountability, one is learner support, and the last one is learning and teaching resources. So we have the principal, the teacher, the learner, and materials. And the notion of a community for effective practice is that it should be self-organizing and self-sustaining ultimately. So that it should be the energy of the group that directs the community itself and directs the work that the community does. Another important thing about communities for effective practice is that they have a specific set of objectives. Now, every community that we run has its own objectives that are specific to its focus areas, but all Bridge communities have 5 objectives. One which focuses on the development of trust and common purpose. And that's really, I think, the foundational place for communities. Without that, nothing else can really happen. Then there's a focus in terms of objectives on the reduction of duplication and the maximizing of resources. So how to work together in ways that avoid our having to do the same things, and in ways in which we can use each other's materials, use each other's resources, and use each other's knowledge. The third objective focuses on the spreading of effective practice, so how to identify what's working and spread information about that. The fourth objective focuses on the impact of the community on the system as a whole. And then the last one looks at the impact on policy. And for Bridge, all of these objectives are measurable. We are looking all the time at how communities are meeting these objectives, and we're looking at the indicators, and we're trying to keep records that quantify development in all of these areas, as well as provide qualitative information to us, in order that we can demonstrate the impact of the community. We've listed here the 5 objectives in a graphic, I think, that shows the idea that the development of peer support and common purpose is foundational. We called it short-term for the purpose of the graphic, although obviously that's also a long-term thing and requires constant maintenance. But without the common purpose and peer support and trust, there can be very little activity beyond that. We've learned from some of our other communities, particularly the communities we've been running for 2 years now in the Western Cape, that if you move to action too quickly in a community, without the development of trust and common purpose, you can undermine the effectiveness of the community and you have to go back and start again. I think the other purpose of this slide is just to indicate how systemic contribution and an impact on policy on long-term objectives and due to time. So as I said at the beginning, the Xenix Foundation is the funder of this Community for Effective Practice and is Bridge's partner in this regard. And Bridge has certain areas of responsibility. It was responsible right at the beginning in 2010 for a research process where it went around and interviewed innovators in maths and science, learner support, and asked them what the issues were and what a community of practice should focus on. We also do all the stakeholder coordination, the logistics and facilitation of both the main group and focus group meetings. And we do the information and knowledge management. Not only of distribution of articles and resources and so on, but also its knowledge management around the extent to which objectives are being met by this community. The goal of this particular project, running a community of practice in maths and science learner support, is to have an increased impact on the number of quality maths and science graduates in the country. So that was the clear objective right from the word go. And Bridge's deliverables have been to host, convene and facilitate meetings, as well as to document the lessons from this community and write summaries of work and practice and spread those amongst members of the community and to wider members of the Bridge community. A short history of the maths and science learner support community shows that it's only been around for just over a year. It started in November 2010. Where we did a research process, what I mentioned just now, and then we had the first community meeting where a group of innovators came together and made a commitment to work together. In 2011, we had 4 further main group meetings, and also in 2011, 4 focus groups were formed, and a total of 18 focus group meetings were held during the course of 2011. So there was a huge amount of activity in this group during 2011, with a lot of sharing, a lot of innovative activity happening in various focus areas. And just to talk a little bit about the outcomes, things that we noticed that happened in 2010 into 2011. I think in the main group, there was a strong sense of a development of common purpose. We did a lot of facilitating of process work in the main group. And the development of common purpose and the beginnings of the development of trust, I think it would be fair to say, started to emerge. There was also quite a focus on systems work for the main group. And that group, during the course of last year, went through a series of exercises looking at systems issues, and they identified 7 issues that they considered to be central to the education system's performance. And by November last year, they had narrowed those 7 issues down to 3 that they wished to pay attention to, 1 being on teachers, 1 being on curriculum, and 1 being on unions. And last week we held a follow-on meeting from that in which the main group actually took 2 of those issues forward into projects they was wanting to work on. Now, as I said, we don't just have the main group, but we also have focus groups, of which this is one. And so these are the 4 focus groups. There's one that looks at tertiary access, and that through the course of last year spent a lot of time identifying the shape and size of a tertiary access chain that maps a learner's progress from around about grade 9 when they choose subjects through to the world of work, and is trying to identify where that chain is broken and what work can be done by the focus group in order to address the issues in that chain. The monitoring and evaluation focus group is this group here. And what it did is from around about March last year, it hosted a series of colloquia where it was really doing presentations and evaluations in real development contexts, as well as sharing tools and templates and resources. And we've had a lot of particularly funders doing presentations for us. So there was a presentation done by the Red Cap Foundation, one done by the Xenex Foundation, and one done by Sassel and Zala and Sassel themselves, and so on, as well as a lot of input that's been given by Jennifer and Kalisa into evaluative work in development contexts. We also have a focus group that looks at learner selection, and that has been focused on research really around what impact learner selection has on results, if any. So we did a research process last year where we looked at the two Johannesburg schools, St. Stephen's and St. Mary's, and we looked at how very different they are in terms of their approach to learner selection. One has very stringent selection criteria, and the other one doesn't select at all. And we tried to have a look at what impact that had on their results. And they've also been sharing resources. And then we've got a Saturday Schools focus group that is focused on database mapping to try and see who's doing what, where, particularly in Gauteng. Some of the highlights and achievements from this community is that we've done the mapping of stakeholders, particularly with learner selection and Saturday Schools. There's been a lot of sharing of database information, sharing of resources, sharing of examples of evaluation in real development context, sharing of tools and templates. And a lot of these things have been put onto Bridges communication platforms, whether it's portal and social network. The drafting of the tertiary access chain I mentioned to you earlier, and that I think is a significant step forward with a potential systemic impact in the long term. There's been a lot of the forming of partnerships and work on relationships, and as well as documenting lessons from stakeholders. So those are some of the key highlights and achievements of this community. So just before I hand over to Jennifer, I just wanted to briefly explain the rationale for M&E. We decided, first of all, that we'd like to work with an external partner so we could get external assessment of the work that we've been doing. And Kalisa conducted this for us from November 2011 to January 2012. We chose November 2011 because it was the first anniversary of the community, so we felt a year was a sizable enough chunk of time to give us a sense of what had worked and what hadn't worked. And what we really wanted to know, first of all, was to what extent Bridges' objectives had been met. We also wanted to know what all of you felt about the value of the community, what you'd been getting out of it, what you felt about the knowledge management and facilitation, and what you felt about the main groups versus the focus groups itself. We also wanted to know what you felt that we should be doing differently, and we wanted ideas about going forward in 2012.